my heritage is one of diplomacy. And one thing that I in San Diego vie for is reparations. And so part of the thing that I know is like there is a path to this and there's a way of opening this up. And reparations right now is coming through funding of projects. And that aspect of it is really important to acknowledge because with with the lack of access to land, we need to have opportunities for indigenous communities to implement their strategies. And so one thing I'm finding is that purpose and place is what we're missing. And so the opportunity then is like when I look at my purpose and place, what I realize is that as I consume the food that is appealing to me, I realize it's part of my heritage and ancestry. Before I was able to do the DNA testing and find out how diverse my background is, I had a general understanding of the things that I liked, and a lot of the foods and medicines I was called to were part of my being. And so later when I found that out, I realized that there's so much of my practice that has been embodied through my heritage, through my ancestry.
Hello, everyone. Good evening or good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to an event co-sponsored by WGBH Forum Network and Biodiversity for a Livable Climate. This is the Life Saves the Planet series, Life Saves the Planet series. And our presentation tonight is titled A New Generation of Changemakers Reclaiming Ancestral Wisdom. I want to take as little time as possible doing a brief introduction, and yet there's so much I also want to say. So we'll see how this falls out. From these speakers, I started thinking in our planning sessions about the idea that we are all indigenous people and that we all have ancestral wisdom. Our species has been on this planet 200,000 to 400,000 years and probably longer, and it has been shaping the planet in ways for a long time very, very, very positively, and in the more recent past, not so much. But we did this as indigenous people. We all were, not that many generations back, indigenous. And I'd like us all to keep in mind that we are part of a great chain of being, of generations, and that right now we need to learn some new ways that turn out to be old ways of relating to the planet, relating to the earth, relating to Mother. So our speakers tonight are Jess Alvarez-Parfrey, who is the Executive Director of Transitions US and has a strong background in community organizing and great faith in the power of collective action to bring about meaningful change. She'll be joined by Nathan Liu, who is the director of Mongol Tribe, an organization that he founded, who is very interested in agroecology, agroforestry, and in creating community and creating communities that are very healthy. So this is all about health too. And they are also joined by William Wildcat, Coakí, who is a member of the Seminole Nation from Oklahoma, and yet, like all of us, shares many other different roots. And his work is taking place in the Gila Wilderness in southern New Mexico. And everybody is concerned both with what's happening on the ground and what they can do on the ground and what they can teach others about working on the ground, but also in building community. That in order to heal this planet, we have to heal relationships with one another. We have to take some pretty radical, whatever, collective action to reorient ourselves towards working cooperatively, collaboratively, and creating a healthier world socially, emotionally, as well as ecologically. So I'm going to turn this over now to Jon Schull, the moderator, and also the director of the Eco Restoration Alliance. And I will let him take it from there.
Thank you, Paula. And actually a very good reminder of something that came out of some conversations that we had with Nathan and with Jess and with Coakí. These are three people who I met in the process of making connections for the Eco Restoration Alliance, a growing network of people all over the world who are convinced that in eco-restoration lies the potential salvation of the planet and the climate and the living things on that planet. And in the course of a few weeks, I had the opportunity to chat with all three of them and found them to be a really interesting collection of people of a particular rough generation, not my generation, of a particular geographic distribution, and with some very interesting intersecting perspectives. At this point, they know each other, and I thought it would be really great to be able to sit in a room with them and just hear them describe their view of the emerging landscape for rethinking our role on the planet, and to talk about their roots, the path that brought them together, and the path that they think we're all on. And so I'm going to try just to be a fly on the wall and to wave my hands if they go over my head on behalf of the audience. And we begin, therefore, with Jess.
Thank you, John. I want to say a big thank you to Paula as well, to WGBH Boston and Biodiversity for a Livable Climate, and of course to Nathan and to Coakí. It's been a pleasure to get to know you both better. And I do have some slides which will help kind of ground my presentation. Thank you, Andrew. So as Paula mentioned, my name is Jess Alvarez-Parfrey, and I am serving as the Executive Director of Transition US. And the broad mission of Transition US is to create a more regenerative, just, and joyful world using a variety of methodologies, tools, and resources. But what we keep coming back to in this work is the critical nature of relationship, reciprocity, and relationality. So that will be kind of a key message coming through in my presentation. So to start off, I want to begin by acknowledging my ancestors who I carry with me wherever I go. I am the descendant of indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, of the Yaqui Yuame people of Sonora, Mexico, the Southwest, of stolen peoples from West Africa with rich traditions in the Yoruba culture, Sicilian, many different lineages, but that's not the point. I'm here because of my ancestors' resilience, their ingenuity, their creativity, their sacrifice. And I want to recognize why I do the work that I do. It is for the next generations to come. So my why is my son, Easton. And I also want to kind of ground the work that I do with transition and my orientation to this work of regeneration with this quote from Rob Hopkins, who is one of the co-founders of Transition. If we wait for the governments, it'll be too little, too late. If we act as individuals, it'll be too little. But if we act as communities, it might just be enough, just in time. And I want to also add that communities are human peoples, plant peoples, winged, finned, four-legged. These are all of the all members of the communities in which we must work. So locating myself, I am joining you all today from the meeting place of the territories of the Cahuilla people, of the Cupeño, of the Kumeyaay, and many other indigenous nations who had come through this area to trade and connect and collaborate. And my ancestors, the Yaqui, would come up through Southern California and San Diego to trade as well. So I am not on specifically my ancestral territories. I walk very humbly, knowing that I am a guest on this land. And I'm extremely blessed to be living on 44 acres of land with my husband and my son. And this is a place that we are actively tending and learning. I think that's the most important part, is I am a guest here. So I have to learn and understand what are the protocols, what are the relationships that are already in place that I need to honor and respect, and where is the work, and this is my community organizer hat, where is the work already happening, and how can I show up in a good way to support that effort that is already ongoing. And right there, there's a picture included here of some white sage and seed. So this land is covered in sacred medicine to many peoples of the Southwest, and this was a medicine that was actively traded. So this feels like an invitation to remember that these ways in which we define private property, that's a different system, it's a different view, and it has created a lot of pain and fragmentation, a lot of deep issues that we're working with right now. So this is a reminder that this is a space that needs to be held in community. So we have some beautiful plans in that regard. So I want to talk a little bit about this little girl. This is me at about age 4.5, 5, and I'm seated eating a bowl of my favorite comfort food. This is my nana sopita, which is a soup that she would make for me all the time. And I have my best buddy, Iggy, my iguana, on my shoulder. So this is to kind of give you a snapshot of where I come from. I was very interested in the natural world, animals, plants, and it was because of the culture and the environment in which I was raised. So I was raised with the knowing and the knowledge that I come from indigenous peoples who lived in a very different way to what I was mostly living on the day-to-day. So, you know, coming from a very multicultural, multiracial background, there's just so many things in place to entrain you towards a more assimilated or colonized way of being in the world. And at this time, my father was a non-traditional student at UC San Diego. And so I remember going to cell biology and biochemistry classes with him and just kind of soaking up that knowledge. Also being on a university campus, seeing the community I was around was international. My neighbors were from Russia. They were people from Southeast Asia, like they're everywhere. And so that just felt very natural, that we all have very different gifts and that we could use them towards some collective good together. And this little girl is also a very passionate fighter for justice. I think since I was born into this world, I felt very called to speak up when needing to speak up, to listen when needing to listen, but always being a champion for the things that weren't lovable. I have a lizard, not a puppy. I love the scaly things and creatures that were misunderstood. So I think that also kind of informs my approach to the work, is like, where can we find the good? Where can we find the gift? So I want to talk about the work that is occupying most of my time at this moment. This is Regeneration Nation. It's a 3-year multifaceted campaign that Transition US has been incubating and tending with a whole list of amazing partners and collaborators. And the gist of this campaign is to make the vision of a just and regenerative future known throughout the United States and beyond as an attractive and credible alternative to the status quo. Basically, those wild dreams we have of regenerating the land, living in abundance, having all of our basic needs met, living into our highest collective purpose, it is possible. We are here. We have everything we need. That's the spirit of this campaign. So in the face of all of these complex and compounding crises, we do need to do things differently. We do need to reclaim and return to ancestral ways of being, and we need to create the new together. This is the banner image, which I designed. I'm also a creative and an artist for the Regenerative Community Summit, which happened in 2021. This was an amazing gathering, a virtual gathering. We had over 1,000 folks registered, and we had some really powerful conversations about the moment that we were in. What do we need to do? How do we need to come together in new ways to really shift the status quo? We had some amazing speakers, as I mentioned. Lila June Johnston, who is an amazing Dene activist and scholar, gave us this wonderful piece of wisdom. We can actually touch the earth in such a manner that we're actually not hurting her. We're enhancing her. Some people call that regenerative practice. We've been calling it many names for many millennia. So I also am thinking of an elder who I've had the privilege of working with, Roberta Cordero of the Coastal Band of Chumash, and she talks about a lot of these solutions as being back to the future. In order to go forward, we need to go back. This was an important turning point for me personally and professionally. These are some images of the 2021 Transition US Staff Retreat, which occurred in unceded Ute lands in Colorado, where I have many of my ancestral connections and heritage, but specifically in the town of Paonia, where two of our amazing network organizers for Transition US are stationed, Marissa Momartz and Don Hall, and we just had a really powerful conversation about what the world needs now and how transition needs to evolve. And I will give due credit to the maple trees that were surrounding us. I know for a fact they were saying, come on, place-based, participatory, just, reclamation, re-indigenization. They were whispering to us. We all commented on that. We just could feel them holding us there and guiding us. I want to acknowledge the team that I get to work with Transition US, who are bringing in their own ancestral traditions, their own skills and gifts. Again, the message being that we need a team. We need to operate collaboratively. Chef Alex Zubia works in the Central Valley doing cultural reclamation work. He works with systems impacted youth. Elvia Cruz Garcia is based in Los Angeles or Tongva lands. She's very passionate about cooperative development and looking at how our ancestors organized commerce and resource distribution. Gabby Silva Hernandez is very passionate about communications and food sovereignty and reclaiming public space so that we can grow food on it instead of just hoarding it in the speculative real estate market. So again, the call to action, let's do it. Let's build Regeneration Nation. In fact, this nation has been growing in strength and number across each successive generation. And that's because of the work of those that came before us and the work that the little ones, the next generation, are starting to feel called to and connected to. So I see that as an important part of my work, is how do I support those who are coming up to step up and step into their power. So the desire, we need to increase the visibility, the capacity, the impact of the regenerative communities movement. This is how we broadly describe this large phenomenon and desire to return and move forward. So let's make regeneration a household name. It's kind of our catchphrase. Resist, repair, reimagine, and regenerate. This is a protocol, a pedagogy, a curriculum, a way of being and moving through our communities to support healing, imagination, creativity, repair, all of these things that we need to be doing together. It's a new way of moving through the world that we need to get practiced at. So creating that support, that intergenerational and intercultural space so that we can find the things that work. This is essentially the mission of this program, which is a key facet of our Regeneration Nation campaign. I just want to give a quick shout out to this Just Transition framework. I invite folks to take some time with this. I think it just beautifully lays out what we're currently in, this extractive economy, and the steps that we could take to move towards a living economy, a regenerative economy. Economy, if you break down that word, it means how we manage our household. Our planet is the household. The land that we live on is the household. So that's the call. So this was put together by Movement Generation. I want to give them credit for this. So again, the movement is growing. I think it is especially challenging at times to maintain this sense of faith. I will use that use that word. I have a much deeper relationship to what I think that means for me. But faith and belief and hope, and I think praxis, like this work requires that we step outside of our comfort zone and that we commit to a practice on the daily. And that also requires accountability and finding our communities that we are working in service to and being able to learn with. So the resist and build framework is a wonderful approach to doing that work and kind of incubating it and getting it started. And want to give recognition to the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network for that. So this journey of just transition, as I've been describing it, requires absolutely transformation, adaptation, reparations. That is part of the healing work, re-indigenization, cultural revitalization, and again, that reclamation work. And I have here a quote from Bell Hooks, who is another ancestor, not of my DNA lineage, but a spiritual ancestor who helps to guide me in this work. True resistance begins with people confronting pain and wanting to do something to change it. One of the most vital ways we sustain ourselves is by building communities of resistance, places where we know we are not alone. So I am a community builder. That is the work that I've been sent here to do. This is an outline of those key programs of the Regeneration Nation campaign. I invite you all to check out our website to spend some more time with these, but we have the Regeneration Core Network, which is a workforce development project. A lot more to share on that. Nathan is a key collaborator, co-conspirator, advisor on that work. We have the Regenerative Communities Design Lab, Movement Regenerator Circle, which are the folks who invest in our work. For those of us who are not able to do this work on the daily, finding ways in which we can invest in the folks that are is really critical. I'm also saying that knowing it's end of year fundraising season. So unabashed ask for folks to really explore those worthwhile projects out there because there are many. R4 Practicum is that community of practice and curriculum that can help us to exercise those new muscles of moving in community. And Robin Wall Kimmerer absolutely had to have a quote, because I think this really summarizes, regardless where our ancestors come from, as Paula said at the top, we are all indigenous to some place, and that means responsible. So being naturalized to a place means to live as if this is the land that feeds you, as if these are the streams from which you drink, that build your body and fill your spirit. To become naturalized is to know that your ancestors lie in this ground. Here you will give your gifts and meet your responsibilities. This is rights versus responsibilities, two different ways of thinking of these things. To become naturalized is to live as if your children's future matters, to take care of the land as if our lives and the lives of all of our relatives depend on it, because they do. And then this last quote on belonging. Again, we may come from many different places, have many different heritages, but I'm reminded of mycelium and how these tendrils of connection facilitate the superorganism that we call a forest. And it's about sharing. It's about knowing who's where and in what place and what stage of growth, having that awareness. And again, that accountability and responsibility. Next slide, please. All right, this is, I think, my last one. So together, let's create ecosystems of care, creativity, and collaboration. This is Regeneration Nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. Your perspective and your attitude, if you will, are really in interesting contrast to the usual presentation of these issues. The mycelial networks, these underground networks of mushrooms, I just wanted to name because it's a great metaphor for some of the work you're doing. But the other term that I'm not sure that everyone understands is the relationship between your attitude about walking humbly on the land and the concept of regeneration. I'm just wondering if you can connect those dots.
Absolutely. For me, regeneration is not possible without the reparations piece, without the healing work. It's putting things back together. And there was a period that we can call contact where the world started to fall apart. So I think there's a lot of, attitude in the space of like, the world is ending. Oh my gosh, things are really bad. For many peoples, the world has already ended in a way. And these peoples persist and are bringing us some of the most critical data, if you want to call it, science, knowledge that will help us to create a sustainable future. So I think with the regeneration piece and walking humbly on the land, you're going to miss a whole lot of information and opportunities to connect in a meaningful way if you do not walk humbly and if you are not aware of what exists outside of yourself. So in the colonized view, there's the center point and the world exists because you deem it so. That is not an indigenous way of seeing the world. So I want to be clear about that. And I invite folks to do some study on decolonized ontologies and ways of knowing, because it is very different from what most of us have been immersed in since we started grade school.
Thank you, Jess. Nathan, do you want to pick up from here?
Yeah, thank you so much. So my name is Nathan Liu. I am the executive director of Mongol Tribe. We're a grassroots 501c3 based out of San Diego. And I have a short presentation to share with you guys. And I'm excited because my experiences now are spent more time in the forest, and it's something that has been a long time coming as I've gone through my studies and gone through my development and building as a being. So right now I'm performing some agroforestry work in Palomar Mountain in San Diego, California. Basically, a little background about who I am. Born and raised in San Diego. It's been my pleasure of being here for over 30 years and just really witnessing the change. San Diego is a very dynamic space and is full of very unique beauty and biological diversity, one of the most biodiverse hotspots in the world. With 2,200 different plant families that are known, we have over 1,800 that are represented natively. So there's such a range of things that can grow here. So with that, my studies had taken me to study agriculture and further into natural resources, a forestry program at Oregon State, where I focused on fish and wildlife conservation. And in this process of just learning more about myself and more about my where my food comes from and how to take care of my family and my community without a reliance and dependence upon a system was really interesting and fascinating to me. So I started working around the urban orchard space and started working towards becoming an arborist and subsequently training as a forester. And so in this process, what I realized was that I had learned from my family and my grandparents and my parents all actively have grown food in their backyard gardens. And so my relationship with food was always one where I knew that it came from plants and trees. I knew it came from nature, and I had that exchange with it to where I was able to go outside and gather in a small manner. And knowing that, I started to really appreciate how food tells stories, and our heritage and relationship with food was a direct relationship with my personal well-being and my cultural ancestry. So as I've worked through this knowledge, I started being more fascinated by how our food systems work, how ecological and social justice worked. And those pieces of access started to become a key question. And so through this, I ended up joining our local chapter of Slow Food. And I recently became a board member of Transition US. And I started doing more of this public outreach, public engagement work. And through this process, I realized, well, there's some key opportunities using traditional knowledge to really just open up pathways to access. And so one of those things that we started was a seed library program. This Mongol tribe organized out of this idea of gathering community and sharing knowledge and trying to align resources for community well-being. And building upon this is our focus is holistic health and wellness, and we're addressing this through community development and capacity building that focuses on bridging this holistic health and wellness with the needs of ecology. And so this relationship with sustainable regenerative land management and just hands-on opportunity to actually learn and grow within these various scopes I started to realize that everything was siloed. And so I saw an opportunity to share some insight that to me seemed like very simple knowledge. But as I shared, I realized there was such a need in our community to learn some of these basic fundamentals that I started being asked more and more about what more can we do? And so I was encouraged to organize. So we're a 501c3. We're in our 5th year of operation, and these are our 3 main pillars. These are our main programs that we're working on: our food and medicine sovereignty program, a natural land management program, and our holistic health and wellness program. And within each of these, there's these various scopes of practice that we're using as guiding lights. And really what we're also doing is following the need and availability of resources. Being in San Diego, land is one of the biggest challenges of access. So I started out most of my work with community garden spaces and just really interacting in free spaces where I had an opportunity to just trade as time and practice. And so subsequently, the development of the need for seeds and pruning and grafting and these different practices of food care started to emerge. And as that expanded, it led me into more forestry work, which is where a lot of my educational background is starting to shine through now. And so that natural land management movement brought me into the forest, where I started really understanding that the methodologies that I'm implementing that are scientifically proven, but also have like Jess said, a different way of quantification and measurement. So as a scientist, I'm very fascinated by, how things unfold and the repetition and continuity of practices, but also realizing that there's some things that just take time and that are not always able to be measured and quantified in the same way that we want to in a scientific inquiry. And so that's where my practices in natural land management resulted in more regenerative type approaches. Natural farming and silviculture and shepherding all kind of roll into this, and subsequently holistic health and wellness, because our personal well-being is such a key element within our mutual success, both ecologically and socially. And so that part of it is where we have started organizing ways of engagement that, give people access to these ecological practices, but also focus on personal development and well-being. And so the long-term hope is to develop a forestry school, a TEK school, where we can empower our community locally to take on more responsibility and purpose in place. And subsequently, through these projects, building opportunities for reparations and land back. Because the strategies of care are one that result in, again, community well-being, like Jess says, all of our families. So briefly, I just wanted to share some photos and kind of touch a little bit on how I'm implementing these practices and programs. The first one, the natural land management program, is the highlight of where I'm at right now. I am fortunate to spend about half my week on a 67-acre ranch in Palomar Mountain, the Nate Harrison Serenity Ranch. Has a history, San Diego history and indigenous history. Is Payon Quachum land, and this area is historically known as a place of retreat, a place that was traveled to for learning and healing, and community centered. And we know this because on site there are grinding stones, metates, scattered throughout our property. And within this space, it's amazing to see the amount of them centralized and aggregated underneath the oak trees. So it's a mixed oak woodland, and it's one that has been had some management applied, but historically would have had far more management applied. So we are currently implementing some of the traditional management strategies of fuel load reductions, while also looking at how do we care for the oaks, which are currently facing a variety of ecological challenges. One of the biggest opportunities that I see in this is that the oak woodlands are in our current management are being looked at as a wildland rather than as historically what they are as one of our first food forests. They were managed essentially as an orchard. and cared for in such a way that the understory allowed for the growth of various shrubs and medicines that were utilized, and would open up the space for the ability to see animals beneath it. And so the hunting and foraging aspects were much more successful when we can navigate through the oaks in a more open environment. And so part of our process is basically showing that there is a way of approaching this care that is more holistically minded and opens up an opportunity for community health and well-being that will subsequently heal the oaks and address one of our bigger challenges in Southern California right now, which is the gold-spotted oak borer. So there's a few pictures of Palomar. It's a beautiful space and very dynamic. We're about 3,300 elevation, over 30 inches a year of rain, and it's just a very special space in the world. And this mountain is known for having many healing springs, and the waters of this mountain are very nourishing and clean and pure. And so one of the most important values that we can acknowledge in this space is the ability for us to have clean water, clean drinking water within our community. And so we know that this connection with the mountains leads down into the valleys below and feeds our agriculture and trickles down into our lagoon systems, where we have the cycling of nutrients and feeding of our fishes unfolds into the ocean, right? So this connection with Palomar for me is opening up the relationship and communication about a bioregional approach to watershed health. And so that's why for me, it's a really part of my purpose, I know, is to go to the headwaters and to protect and preserve and enhance the forest health in those areas to improve the biotic potential for increasing water holding capacity and subsequently water available downstream. So our oak woodlands are struggling in this way. The tree on the right you can see is fully standing dead. This is happening all over Southern California. And this on the left, you can see we have a natural predator that likes to eat these beetles, is our woodpeckers. So one of the biggest challenges we're finding is that the approach currently is just oftentimes to bring in heavy machinery. Our approach is the heaviest machinery we usually use is a chainsaw. But for the most part, we're really just trying to address the whole through a holistic practice. So if we can address the beetles and reduce the amplifier trees, as they're calling them, which are the most highly infected trees in the grove, then we can eliminate 80 to 90% of the beetles. And we're hoping that through that practice, we can help the woodpeckers help us, so we can kind of get ahead of the populations. So I just wanted to show these as an example of what we're witnessing, and you can see why this could be a huge fire hazard. So our research projects basically are looking at how do we look at this holistic model while also addressing the opportunities for restorative purpose. And so we are currently applying TEK, and we're looking into applying cultural burning, which would allow us to trigger a fire response in the oaks. And the oaks have this beautiful relationship with the mycorrhiza and the fungal networks within the soil that when they experience smoke in their canopy, they call water to their surface to protect the root zone, and subsequently to allow the water that's deep, that is 100 plus feet below where their roots are reaching, to come back to the surface. So we're running a project, or we're in process of developing this opportunity to implement these strategies to see if we can improve the soil water holding capacity, as well as bring water back to the surface and reactivate our springs, which have not been active for quite some time now. And so my approach right now is I'm documenting using GIS surveying to document the biological diversity of trees and ethnobotanically relevant shrubs and species. And in this process, we're learning a lot about what's there. So this is a huge opportunity for us to learn more about the oaks and be able to show that these strategies actually work. So we're implementing rotational grazing, and so we're, after our initial treatment, are bringing the animals through at a timely tempo to help us address a lot of the invasive species and grasses and other pests such as mustards and thistles. And then we are working towards farming the forest. So we're incorporating edible fruit trees and medicinal trees, as well as looking at mushroom log inoculations for some opportunities to create more food. And then we're going to be milling trees and sorting out things that as they come down, we want to be able to get the most equity and value out of them in our processing. So, and then we're also hosting educational community workshops. The picture on the right is our orchard that we installed at one of our volunteer campouts. And on the left, with Jess and the transition team, we built a little paddock for our sheep. And then our long-term goal, like I said, is to build a TEK apprenticeship program. And so, reishi is a common mushroom that we have growing on site. And you saw some pictures of turkey tails. So, I love this relationship with food and space. And so we're working through this process of, helping support community development and equity and reparations through these methodologies. So again, thank you so much. Here's how you can find more about my projects. And I always love Dr. Shiva's quotes. The biggest thing we can do for humanity is work with the soils. And in this, I'd like to go ahead and pass it off to Coakí.
Thank you, Nathan. John, did you have any questions or comments at this point? Nathan?
No, I'm struck by the relationship between the hardcore traditional ecological knowledge, the TEK work, that Nathan is doing, and this balance that Jessica has between, on the one hand, resistance, but also on sort of the internal and external healing process. And as an amateur or not amateur ethnographer, I'm wondering if you have anything to say about the common threads that emerge from this conversation.
Well, yeah, it's notable that Nathan left off with the Vandana Shiva quote. She won the Nobel Peace Prize for articulating how all the social justice and ecological justice movements are the same movement, and how we're not going to solve one side of these problems without solving all of these problems, or creatively finding beautiful solutions to all of these challenges that we're facing right now in all of those realms. Yeah, I'm struck from this conversation how we need to, the challenge that I see that we're facing is trying to figure out how to take care of and how to help everybody, empower everybody, every being of every species, of every ecosystem on this planet, empower every being to be able to meet their own needs, and helping each other meet their own needs and learning how to meet our own needs. And that takes so many shapes. And when we talk about that in psychology and social justice, there are traditions like nonviolent communication that can help inform us along that pathway. A lot of healing justice and social justice movements offer us a lot of insight on how to restore equilibrium internally inside of ourselves, or interpersonally, intercommunally as communities. And all of these I see as vital. What we call the social permaculture I see as vital to being able to be in, just to create a disposition as individuals and as communities, which allows us the chance of returning to equilibrium within the ecosystems in which we are in community also. My name is William Wildcat. I'm from the Oklahoma Seminole Nation, Cougar Clan, Thomas Palmer Band. The Wildcat was a mistranslation. It was named after a Florida Seminole named Coakí. And it's a variation of the word Coakí, which means panther, and that's what I go by as Coakí. Some of my earliest memories were, my most beautiful memories, the earliest beautiful memories I have are picking green beans with Seminoles and Kiowas in polyculture gardens, and remembering my mom explaining that those seeds had been planted by human beings, that a lot of those seeds had been, and a lot of those other seeds just came up on their own, and that we don't fight anybody, that they all grow together. And I remember eating those green beans and being nourished by them, feeling nourished by them, and tasting how delicious they are, and just how good that felt. When I was 5, I was put as steward of a small piece of organic garden 38 years ago, 39 years ago. I'm 44 now. I've been doing organic gardening for most of the 39 years since. It's my relationship with stewarding Earth has changed and evolved a whole lot. My education was in mechanical engineering and mathematics at the University of New Mexico, and while I was doing that, I was learning about soil biology in my free time, and really falling in love with that and realizing that that is my passion. And at some point along the way, realized that ecological restoration is my spiritual path, and that's what I've been been aware of as my spiritual path and focusing on for the last 9 years.
Most agronomists don't use the phrase spiritual path, but to me, that's sort of the deep root underlying all of these stories. Do you want to talk about how that works?
Man, we need so much healing right now in so many ways. All of our ancestors were indigenous all around this planet. Doesn't matter what you look like. And most of us have incredibly complex quilt works of ancestry when we look back, because of all of the many thousands of years of waves of migration, as far back as we can believe that we see into the past. And beyond that, there were waves and waves and waves of migration for thousands of years. And we look back far enough, for most of us, we see that our ancestry is the entire world, and all of our ancestors were indigenous the entire time until very recently. And we've all been disconnected from the majority of our ancestral knowledge in the last 1,000 years, most of us, between the Inquisition and the genocides on Turtle Island and on Maruca. And we're suffering so much here in this in these cultures which do not care for the needs of individuals, that don't honor the needs of individual beings, of all the species, of all the ecosystems, don't honor the needs of ecosystems. And I'm a part of this movement to try to create cultures on Earth that do honor the needs of all beings, of all species, of all ecosystems. And boy, there's so much healing that we need. I've never known anybody who went into their garden and quieted their mind and started asking to be in relationship with the beings in that garden that was not able to hear communication with certain beings. I don't know anybody who's meditated under a big tree, really quieted their mind for some time, that did not receive some wisdom, some guidance, some support from that tree. We all have all of the capacities to be in healthy balance with all of the beings and all of the ecosystems of Mother Earth that all the other animals exhibit. And it's because we're still indigenous peoples. We've just undergone some big traumas in the last 1,000, maybe few thousand years. But as Paula said, our species is hundreds of thousands of years old. We have long history on this planet. And so there's so much healing that needs to be done. And for me, it's important to give myself permission to be what I am spiritually, as an animal, sexually, creatively, in every way. All the complex diversity of my being, to honor it all, and to honor every perception I have, to honor my feelings and my needs, fully. And so I don't try so hard to fit into what I imagine the predominant culture is going to want me to fit in order to gain respect from the they that I imagine is listening or perceiving or judging or potentially withholding access to resource or anything like that. I'm done with that, because I really want to. I want self-actualization in my life, and I want that for all of my brothers and sisters. And I want to see a culture where where we're honoring all of the needs of all the beings.
Now, let me pick up on a part of this and say that there are a number of questions that have come in from the audience. So I just want to mention a few and then open it up to general discussion among you. One person writes, how can we inspire deep connection with the natural world in people who are not indigenous to the land where they live? Another person asks, how can atheist communities begin to create water blessing ceremonies? And another one says, can you give any advice on how to connect with indigenous groups? I think the point is that our audience, partly self-selected, but I think partly also inspired by what you're saying, recognizes that you seem to be onto something that is not readily available. So how can people get on board? What do people need to do to move things in the right direction? And this is open to all of you.
I would love to speak on that for a moment and then pass it on to Nathan and Jessica. Like I said, I think we are all descended from indigenous peoples, and it's not that long evolutionarily that we've been disconnected. Even if you look at my European ancestry, I'm descended from the survivors of lots of genocides from all over the world. A lot of them in genocide in Europe. The Inquisition lasted 500 years, began about 1,000 years ago, ended about 500 years ago, and was a successful genocide of most of the indigenous tribal peoples of Europe. And the other 99.99999% of my ancestors, of their ancestors, were all indigenous up until that point, going back before humans were humans. We all have all of the capacities sitting latent in us. Like I said, I don't know anybody who's ever gone into their garden and spent time quieting their mind and asking to be in a relationship who did not begin becoming in relationship, finding themselves in relationship. We've all got those capacities. How do you restore that? You get into wilderness and you quiet the English language part of your brain, which, this colonizer, slave, genocidal slave language. Just quiet that and spend time listening and asking permission to be in relationship, to be known and to know. And I mean, the blondest, bluest eyed people I know who do that have relationship. And there's nobody who has more or less relationship, who has more or less access to relationship with Gaia, more or less access to relationship with spirit, with creation, with this great mystery, with Mother Earth, with the sun. None of us need a translator. And that indigeneity that so many of us are missing, that connection with our indigenous ancestry that so many of us are missing, and many of us don't have names for, don't know what that ache is, don't know what to do about that. It's healable by spending time in wilderness and by recreating wilderness around us, which is what I really encourage. That's a lot of the education and the support that I do of communities is just encouraging people, teaching reforestation, reparation of ecosystems by restoring biodiversity, especially ligneous species, like starting by restoring the canopy layers around us, doing food forestry around us, doing syntropic agriculture and other forms of regenerative horticulture, which mix annual and perennials, so that if that farm ever goes fallow, you have a resilient, biodiverse forest that is functioning in a healthy way. And we recreate wilderness around ourselves and then spend time in it, get off of the computer screen, out of the house, out of the car, out of the building, and spend time outdoors. And those capacities and that wisdom that is being held, that the trees can remind us of, that our ancestors can remind us of, that our dreams we can receive through dreams. I mean, it's being held for us, and it will come back to us. It can come back to us.
Yeah, I really appreciate everything that Coakí just said. And in terms of my own journey, I think learning to see the place in which you call home with new eyes that allows for the deepening of meaningful relationship is critical. And there are many different ways to do that. I do think there is a lot of background noise. There are a lot of things in place that keep us in a particular way of being and doing and moving through the world and relating to each other. So it does require getting, in my opinion, a certain amount of uncomfortable and pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and recognizing that you can find healing, you can find peace, you can find connection. That is something that is our birthright, is to live in deep relationship to the earth. So I may not be living in my ancestral territory, but I see this place is connected to all of the earth. It exists all in relation. You cannot fragment it and cut it and put borders and say, this is just this place. That way of thinking is what has got us into this problem, into this manifestation of the problem. So just challenging ourselves. And again, that point about listening and moving humbly. There are many folks who are willing to offer support and encouragement. I'm thinking of the many teachers I've had, particularly Indigenous women and femmes, who are doing this work every single day and really creating collaborative and open and healing space for people of all traditions, of all backgrounds, because we need each other. That's the reality check that climate change has given us. We need each other, and we need to figure out how to live in relationship with each other and with the earth. And that may look different for everybody. Nathan, I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, Indigenous ways are one that require diplomacy. So I find myself often in this position of diplomacy of one aspect. So my heritage is mostly Southeast Asian, Chinese, Vietnamese, Japanese, Sri Lankan, Mongolian, which is Northern Han, Southern Han, Punjabi, Indian, and I have some Peruvian. So my heritage is one of diplomacy. And one thing that I in San Diego vie for is reparations. And so part of the thing that I know is like there is a path to this and there's a way of opening this up. And reparations right now is coming through funding of projects. And that aspect of it is really important to acknowledge, because with the lack of access to land, we need to have opportunities for our Indigenous communities to implement their strategies. And so one thing I'm finding is that purpose and place is what we're missing. And so the opportunity then is, like, when I look at my purpose and place, what I realize is that as I consume the food that is appealing to me, I realize it's part of my heritage and ancestry. Before I was able to do the DNA testing and find out how diverse my background is, I had a general understanding of the things that I liked, and a lot of the foods and medicines I was called to were part of my being. And so later when I found that out, I realized that there's so much of my practice that has been embodied through my heritage, through my ancestry. And so as that's emerged, what I've realized is that my ancestry has been acting in diplomacy for as long as it's been around. And so that relationship with tribal liaisoning is a key positionality. So the best way to get involved with tribal communities is to, one, find that tribal liaison who's willing to bridge that gap between your community of interest and the one that is in need, which right now are the Indigenous communities. And so my hope is to work in those same pathways to find that alignment for myself that also harmonizes with the practices of my cousins. And so in that sense, I find that the opportunity then really is for us to give land back, meaning that whether we actually change ownership, or at least the bridge to me looks like opportunity for care to change. So rather than the idea of management, I look at land stewardship more in the idea of land care. And the Indigenous communities cared for their land just like they cared for their people. One story it reminds me of is the Metates are each looked at as beings, right? Like they're ancestors, they're elders. And so that acknowledgement of them as a present and participatory role within our community is critical to understanding that way of thinking that goes back into animism and our traditional spiritual practices. So the embodiment of that really is unfolding within my life right now in such a way that as I am present in a particular place, I start to feel and sense and embody that space and understand what the needs are. Like Jess mentioned earlier, the trees tell us things. And the more we spend time in them, the easier it is for us to understand what it is that they need. The more we watch the rain fall, the more we realize where we need to build up. And so that part of it is a continual process of practice that, again, there's no one right answer, but that the Indigenous communities have ways that are proven. And so we need to really lean on them in a way that empowers them to be the forefront at the table and make sure that they're constantly included in the conversation about anything. If you need a piece that's missing, just let them know and ask them. And if they have it, they'll make it happen. And either way, like we've been doing this and we're going to do it, whether there's money on the table or not. But at this point, we're in an unprecedented space of time where money is being moved forward and these practices can actually emerge and show the efficacies that we've always known.
And if I may, as the older white guy who spends all of his time glued to computer screens, I just want to say explicitly that the current collapse of social institutions and of the biosphere are testimony to the fact that these attitudes, which are only now becoming examined by those of us who are in our historical role, those attitudes have played an important role in the non-viability of the way things are, whereas most of the Earth's remaining wild lands and the ones that are keeping the biosphere together are under the stewardship of indigenous peoples whose attitudes, however curious they may seem to some of us, have apparently provided a scaffolding for listening to nature and coming up with answers that sustain the larger system, don't just sustain the economic system. And so that's why I think this conversation is so important. Do we have other questions that we'd like to get to here? There was one. If you have any you want to pull up, go for it. But I saw some direct practical questions.
So
about, yes,
I was going to say one of the things that I liked was this question of like, like how do we support the positive vision in this? So often this is a negative discussion around like, oh, there's not enough resources. There's, too many people, all those illusions, right? And really what I want to get at is that, our indigenous philosophies really build upon a space of purpose and growth that is one of abundance, one that when we look at harmony and balance continues to provide for us. And there's a strategy of care of like, how we harvest and use is important, and when we harvest and use is important. So one of the stories I'll never forget is like we have our wildflower blooms, and there was an area where these beautiful wildflowers were just filling a landscape, and people were like, how did they all get here? And indigenous elder came, well, this is one of our sacred sites. We would gather here and we would spread the seed. We'd come at these times a year and we'd do our, processing and gathering, and we'd share that seed and we'd spread it, and rejuvenates the land in these ways and keeps the cycles going. And so this idea of 7 generations is really important, right? This is where that idea is fundamentally built upon, is that we already know the nourishment is here. We just have to acknowledge it. And we have to teach our community how to empower each other through the care of these spaces. And through that, the expansion unfolds naturally rather than it being something that has to be forced, right? So that's where I think like of landscaping oftentimes, it's a very forced idea of purpose and idea and intent. Whereas one of, reforestation is a spreading of natural exchange that is done with mindfulness and with thought. And so we don't harvest when everything's starting to flower, because we want the seeds, so we want the seeds to spread. So those ideas I just think are so critical to this philosophy. And I'm sure Coakí, you probably have some thoughts on this too.
I do. Thank you. I feel really lucky and nourished to be in relationship with all of you and to be in this conversation. And how do we make this a positive conversation? To me, it's this positive potential and giving people a sense of agency, which is really important in relieving stress. It's really extremely stressful for the endocrine system if you don't feel that you have agency in your immediate environment, and we do have agency. Teaching people how to do regenerative horticulture, how to do reforestation, how to do food forestry, gives people the power to sequester carbon where they are, to affect world climate positively, to affect ocean acidification positively in their yard, and how to we teach people how to have nutrient-dense foods for their children, so that their children have a chemical potential to see their epigenetic actualization, their full expression. We have all of the technology that we need, we know how to reforest the desert. We do this. We know how to grow nutrient-dense foods in a way that restores the ecology that we're taking our calories from. We do this. This technology needs to be spread now and needs to be understood by everybody. And cultures around the world are transitioning now to being very receptive to this. And so we're doing this, and it's happening, and we're spreading this knowledge everywhere, and it's just spreading like wildfire right now. And so this is a very, there's a lot of hope right now, because it will only take us 10 years to turn this desertifying planet into a food forest paradise once our species chooses to do that. And so we have all of the power that we need to make this world, to make whatever reality we want for ourselves. And we can do this, and we are doing it. And it's been done before. You know, the indigenous peoples of Mesoamerica turned that part of the world from an arid grassland into a tropical rainforest on purpose 12,000-ish years ago, 10 to 12, depending on who you ask. And it's been proven in Western academia with the pollen records, the rainfall records, the archaeology. It's been proven. We know that this is true, that we know that the Amazon and the Atlantic rainforest were created by human beings, that indigenous peoples food forested the whole Pacific Northwest, that the lines between the grasslands and the deciduous forests to the east of Turtle Island were maintained and chosen by humans, have been doing global level ecological restoration work for tens of thousands of years. There are more than 10,000 years old sciences of this which still exist on this planet. We know how to do what we need to do and what we're doing, what we're about to do, and we have the power. So it's not a negative thing. It's just a matter of inspiring each other, enchanting each other, inspiring each other, all of our friends and family members and community members to take responsibility and do this now.
I'm inspired. Thank you very much.
Yes, I just wanted to add on and really appreciate again the framing and recognition that the land needs us. There is often an attitude in kind of mainstream environmental circles or traditional kind of conservation models where we need to fence something off and keep it wild and that's going to save it. That is so misguided, and that perpetuates what we could describe as environmental racism. And I want to give acknowledgement to Canyon Coyote woman Roots, who recently hosted a group of 80 plus permaculture folks active in this kind of movement work, and held each day with ceremony and remembrance and recognition that these lands, like you said, Nathan, these oak forests, these are food forests. They were tended for thousands and thousands of years. This is science. This is technology. And we can speak about it such. And I operate in the nonprofit space where I have to speak many different languages to different stakeholders. And I think it is important that we come forward very directly and really make the point that these methods need to be invested in and taken seriously. And you cannot believe the amount of ingrained thinking there is where folks are just not open or receptive or willing to see differently. And this is a very real challenge. And at the same time, we have so many beautiful converging visions coming together at this time in history like never before. We have access to the internet, and that's challenging, but the spread of information, the ability to weave something together that is beautiful and can bring us into the future, we were built for this moment. This is why we're here.
All right, then. Thank you so much. That was a really inspiring ending. And I think that is the point, is that we do have this opportunity. Paula, do you want to close us out?
Yes. Well, I'm certainly inspired is probably an insufficient word, but very moved, further educated, and hoping that we can continue this conversation among ourselves, among yourselves, and with different audiences as well. Because, as you say, this is the moment when people have to step up, recognize responsibility, and take it. And I want to thank you all. I also want to let you know that the video will be available in a few weeks of this talk and can be shared. And to let you know that Biodiversity for a Livable Climate is very proud to have made your presentations and your conversation possible. And thanks, Jon, for conceiving of this panel, and thank you all for your participation.